Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, 𝐄𝐚𝐧 Almassian. I'm very happy and pleased to have 𝐒hsan Safarnejad from Iran. He's a geopolitical analyst based in Iran with focus on the Middle East, Russia, China, and the global South. I listened to him during the day of the so-called coup in Russia and one of the Twitter spaces. I was fascinated by his insight. He is really he comprehends the geopolitical conflicts between NATO and let's say the US-led NATO against Russia in Ukraine and also in the Middle East. So I would I would like to discuss with him so many issues because the NATO summit is over, right, 𝐻san, right now, and it seems that there are some cracks between the allies of NATO or the members of NATO. Zelensky is frustrated. He is bashing his so-called allies, and because they didn't give him a clear schedule or even a commitment for Ukraine to join the NATO side. Why do you think that NATO doesn't want Ukraine to join the alliance to begin with?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be on your show. I think that it was always clear that they don't want NATO in, they don't want Ukraine in NATO. NATO was always going to be the battlefield. That was the strategy that, lured the Ukrainians with this bait into the front line to basically, start a war with Russia. And it has a long history. When we go back to 1991, when NATO joined something called North Atlantic, Cooperation Council, and back then after that in 1994, they joined this partnership for peace program, and then after that there was constantly these gestures that didn't mean anything. So again, like in 1997, they established NATO Ukraine committee. And I will come back to this because it's actually really related to the NATO summit. In 2008, in the summit, they said that Ukraine will be a member of NATO. Again, like so many different things happen, events. In 2017, they forced Ukraine to, they didn't force Ukraine, but I think it was a Ukraine tried to do this as a gesture of goodwill in order to convince NATO that they're committed to become a member. So they add an amendment to their constitution, which brings us to today and the NATO summit. The thing that happened was that they announced that now they are going to establish something called NATO Ukraine Council. Didn't I just mention NATO Ukraine Committee in 1997? Well, it doesn't mean anything. Basically, if you go to the website of NATO and you check the different pages, you see that they have basically copy and pasted the content of these two pages. So what you say is a fact. There is no doubt that they're trying to play some ruse on NATO. And again, I mentioned that in 2008 in Bucharest summit, they said that Ukraine is going to become a member. But now 2 months ago, we heard from Secretary General of NATO, Stoltenberg, that NATO will eventually accept Ukraine as a member. And during these last few days, Secretary General Lloyd Austin in the United States has said that there is no doubt that it will become a member. So it's just constantly one gesture after another, no real thing, no real commitment being shown. I mean, what is happening in Ukraine is not a real commitment. They're just providing these people with arms so that they would go and fight against Russians, kill and be killed by Russians. So a very tragic thing. But if we go back, here's the strategy. If people know about the deterrence theories, right? We're now getting into the core of your question. If we go to the deterrence theory, you can't really fight a nuclear power because obviously due to principle of mutually assured destruction, it would be catastrophic. But there are things that you can do. Proxy warfare is one of them. Biological attacks on them would be another thing. That's why you would see all those biological laboratories in Eastern Ukraine, because they were trying to use it. It was not just something for show off. It was real. And, you know, regime change is another too. I think what their plan was from the beginning for Ukraine was proxy warfare. They found out that attacking these countries can be very costly. Look at what happened in Iraq and the lessons that they learned from Iraq. And sorry, when I say lesson learned, I don't mean in a positive way. I mean in a maniacal, suicidal way. Brought about the dirty war in Syria, in which they didn't go to Syria themselves. They armed the Salafi jihadi takfiri, and I really hate to use the word jihadi because in a pure Islamic concept, it's actually a very beautiful thing. The jihad al-akbar, which means greater jihad, is actually working on yourself.
It means literally effort, right? Like it means literally effort. You're putting efforts in your life to become of a higher, let's say, person or become closer to God. This is the purpose of jihad in itself. But these so-called jihadists have hijacked this term and they turn it into some sort of a terroristic ideology.
Exactly. So this brings us to what happened to Syria, unfortunately, which they poured all these fighters from different parts of the world, and they, they forced them to fight against the legitimate government of Syria. And similar thing is happening to Ukraine. In fact, some of the terrorist groups that fought in Syria, like Ajnad al-Qafqaz, which is this terrorist group that is primarily created from people in Caucasus region, southern Russia, North Caucasus, even in Azerbaijan, the Republic of Azerbaijan, which is the northern neighbor to Iran. They brought these people, they mobilized these people, and they armed them so that they would fight in Syria against the government. And then they actually moved them and transferred them to Bakhmut. And you could see them with their patches, with their flag, the black flag with a white circle in the middle of it. This was ISIS fighters who joined forces with the neo-Nazis in Ukraine. And it's very interesting because I was speaking to some of my friends, and they were telling me that some of these neo-Nazis in Ukraine actually converted to Islam because they really appreciated the ideology of ISIS. And you know that they don't know anything about Islam, but
but it gives them free pass to commit murder. It gives them a free pass to commit atrocities.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So they in a way use the same thing. You can't fight a nuclear power. What do? You go and start a proxy war with them, and that's exactly what happened in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And there is very little hope that I would have for Ukraine to actually become a member of NATO. I would never say never, but I think that it's highly unlikely.
Yes, I think so too. My impression is, Ihsan, at the beginning, let's say till February 2022, there was a serious intention to integrate Ukraine into NATO. Even if Ukraine doesn't become a NATO country, let's say NATO member officially, but to become a de facto NATO country on the borders with Russia. But after the proxy war in February 2022, it has become clear that winning against Russia is almost impossible through this proxy war by sending tens of thousands of Ukrainians to their immediate and definite death. So the plans, in my opinion, of London and Washington has been changed a little bit, and they don't want now Ukraine to join NATO officially, because that means these countries have the obligation, the legal obligation, to go to war directly with Russia, something they don't want to do. They want the Ukrainians to die for NATO and not for NATO to die for the Ukrainians. This is the, and I do not really understand how some Ukrainians cannot see this simple fact. But on the other side, the NATO side, for example, says, look, Iran is supporting Russia in this war. And NATO side says Iran claims championing international law, but Tehran supplies deadly drones to an invader. And this is helping the occupation of more Ukrainian sovereign lands, right? How do Iranians see this as a people and also the government in Tehran?
There is a page in NATO website, and it's called Five Myths About NATO. Number one is that NATO is not in war with Russia. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, at number 5, it says Yugoslavia, Iraq, and Libya prove that NATO is not a defensive alliance. And that's exactly a myth. That website suggests that it's a myth. So, I mean, it's very rich coming from these people. But to address this, it's actually relatively true that Iran isn't involved in this war. This might sound contradictory because we have all heard about the drones, and I have been guilty of sort of publishing the videos of them and saying that these are Iranian drones because I like to mess with the NATO trolls. But it's actually more complicated than that, because in 2016, we received an interview from the chief of the Joint Staff of the Iranian Armed Forces. And he mentioned that the Russian side has approached the Iranian military and IRGC to transfer to them a portion of the Iranian drone technology. We don't know what they have transferred to Russia, but considering the fact that Shahed 136 is kind of the bottom of the barrel of the Iranian drone capability, it would make sense that it was actually Shahed 136 technology that was transferred to Russia. So we don't even know that whether these drones come from Iran or not. But even if we accept that, I actually lean kind of towards the fact that Iran is actually procuring these drones for Russia. I actually lean slightly towards that explanation. But even if we believe that there is so much more that Iran can do. Iran has, when it comes to tactical ballistic missiles, we have a series of criteria. Mobility, the speed in which you can fire those missiles, the accuracy, and the sheer destruction that they can inflict on the enemy position. And another thing is the speed of the projectile that is being launched at the enemy. When it comes to this range of 500 kilometers to 3,300 kilometers, I can say that Iran is either the most powerful country or the second. Why do I say this? Because it's actually a very weighty claim. It needs to be proven. Well, because of the fact that United States and Russia signed something called INF, Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty,
Yes.
Which puts a ban on ground-launched ballistic missiles within the range of 500 kilometers to 5,500 kilometers. So in that range, which is banned by the INF treaty, these two countries didn't really invest any money into the projects which would enable them to, manufacture these missiles. So this was a niche area which Iran actually invested a lot of money into, building its missile technology, and that's why Iran is ready. That doesn't mean that the Russians don't have remarkable rocket scientists. No, I'm not making any claim like that. In fact, there was this Russian academic who said that the Iranians would be ranked as the fourth power in the missile technology, which doesn't necessarily mean that Iran is, but it speaks volume about the capabilities that we have. Going back to your question, we haven't seen any missile being provided to Russia, but they can provide 𝐒𝐚𝐽 with a range of 700 kilometers. You can compare it to 𝐄𝐡𝐬𝐚𝐧 It's significantly cheaper. It's more accurate. The CEP of 𝐄𝐡, which CEP stands for circular error probable, which, I mean, if it's lower, it shows that your missile is more accurate. The CEP of 𝐄𝐡, I think the lower bound is 100 meters. For the Iranian 𝐒𝐚𝐽 is 30 meters, and the higher bound is 30 meters. So it shows that it can significantly change the battlefield. It's a tactical missile. It can inflict damage, and it's very accurate. So, but we haven't seen Iran providing this to Russia. We haven't seen Iran giving Russia FAT 360, which is sort of like the ATACMS system that United States has. United States has provided Ukraine with HIMARS, but
yes.
you know, yeah, but the FAT 360 is actually a little bit more capable. Its accuracy is lower than HIMARS. This needs to be said and mentioned. And that's because of the fact that, unfortunately, Iranian systems use the commercial satellites, which shows the importance of investing money in satellite systems. But the support that Iran has provided Russia with has been significant in terms of economic help that it has provided Russia with. What do I mean by that? Iran is now exporting soft drinks. Gas turbines, 41 gas turbines are planned to be exported to Russia. Just to give you a scale of what this means, Nord Stream 1 has only one compressor station. In that one compressor station, only 6 gas turbines are used. 41 gas turbine means that Iran is possibly empowering Russia to run 7 different pipelines the size of Nord Stream 1, which says a lot. They have approached Iran and demanded that Iranian experts would build them 25 gas-powered power plants. Again, something very significant, Iranian surgeon robot called Sina is now being exported to Russia. They have built a manufacturing line there. They plan to build a manufacturing line and assembly line, so that they would like import these parts separately and then assemble them and export them to other countries. There are so many different fields. Like Iran is helping Russia with its aviation industry, I should say civilian airliners. At the early days of war, the Russian Minister of Transportation gave an interview in which he explained that Iran is now helping Russia procuring these plane parts that they need in order to maintain their civilian airliners. And the Airbus airplane, one of the Airbus airplanes that they have, A330-300, the exact model is that, is now being maintained and overhauled in Iran. Iran is maintaining the ships that are coming out of Russia. There are so many different fields that Iran is actually collaborating, cooperating with Russia. I could say that the military aspect of this cooperation is the most minuscule and unimportant aspect, which I don't know, for whatever reason, people ignore all of the other things that are happening. The help that, the collaboration and cooperation that these two countries have with regard to providing an alternative to SWIFT. So, for example, SAPAM and SPFS of Russia have been connected to one another. The Asian Clearing Union is now using the Iranian SAPAM system, which means that they can indirectly be connected to SPFS of Russia. So there are so many exciting things that are happening on the economic front, on the industry and technology front. And I can say with absolute certainty that Iran isn't really helping. I mean, yes, those Shahed 136 drones are really cheap and they are very effective, but it's not to ignore all of the other stuff and focus on this, I think is sort of like a crime.
Hassan, even if Iran is supplying, let's say, sophisticated weaponry to Russia of any sort, I have a tip to the government in Tehran. They could copy the approach of the German government. The other day, the spokesperson of the German Defense Ministry was asked about the German weapons to Ukraine, and he said those are not German weapons; those are Ukrainian weapons of German origins. So they can copy the same approach if the Western governments aren't happy with the any sort of help coming from the Iranian side. But if we want to jump to the Chinese side, the critics of the multipolar world, those who don't want to see multipolar world, they say that there is a growing Chinese role in the world, especially after the proxy war in Ukraine. And the Chinese side is the most benefactor of this conflict, and it's presenting itself as a deal breaker or a mediator, mediated between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and also proposed the mediation between Russia and Ukraine. And these people are worried of China. They say China is an authoritarian country. They say China is a communist country. Therefore, if there is a change in the international system, that will also mean that China will project its power on the world, and hence we will see increasing number of countries adopting communism or adopting authoritarianism. So it will be not in the interest of the people, in their opinion. So first of all, what is multipolarity? We are still in a unipolar world. If there is a multipolarity, how multipolar system would look like, and how can these people, the people who are opposing the multipolar world, how can we make them feel comfortable with the idea of a multipolar world with the presence of China?
Well, thank you for that question, because it was eloquently phrased. There are a couple of things. So what is the multipolar world? It's actually very important. Some people try to use the strawman argument, and they say that when we talk about multipolarity, we're saying that United States will collapse. Mm-hmm. No, this is not what people claim. We say that other players will rise in power, and they will have a share of influence, a sphere of influence over different regions. So it means more competition, right? Which is actually in alignment with the spirit of capitalism, right? More competition would be better for the customers. So for those people who subscribe to capitalism and they have that kind of concern, it's actually better for the world. And one thing that I have to say is that if United States is so concerned about the increase of influence by China, maybe they can use their influence over IMF and convince them to offer countries better deals, because the deals that IMF provides countries with, it comes with all sorts of obligations, authoritarian measures. They force countries to adopt different measures that are actually draconian. Indeed, draconian. They try to meddle with regard to different policies that you have inside your country. Maybe you have a policy that would protect the labor force in that country, but United States and its Western allies, they actually meddle in the internal affairs of other countries. We haven't seen something like that from China in reality. The other thing is that we're moving towards this multipolarity because it's a reality. So many different countries have now are using their mutual currencies in bilateral trades that they have with one another. Saudi Arabia, of all countries, has agreed to sell oil to Kenya
Yes.
by receiving the oil the Kenyan currency. No offense to the Kenyan, but how many of your viewers actually know what's the name of the Kenyan currency? It's shilling. But so many different people don't even know that. The fact that one of the closest allies of the United States adopts measures like this shows that there are actual and legitimate concerns for this. More than 24 countries, and this is the stat that I read in Bloomberg, the actual number I think is actually greater than this, are now on some form of sanctions or under some form of sanctions that have been imposed on them by United States. This is hindering different countries' capabilities in having trade with one another. Your country, Syria, is under, the name is so insulting. It's called Caesar Syrian
Act.
Civilian Protection
Act.
The fact that they call it Protection Act really gets to me. The fact that they have the audacity to call it Protection Act. But these protection acts are killing people. They are killing people, are being killed every day. And the sole responsible for that is United States. United States and its Western allies, they confiscated $350 billion of the assets of the Russian government. Just to give you a frame of reference, because again, everything is sort of relative. We need these constant reminding to people that the stats that we're giving them, what they mean, how significant they are. Out of 196 countries that are recognized by United Nations, 156 of those countries have GDP of less than $300 billion.
Wow.
$300 billion, not $350 billion, which means that if the same thing happens to them, they will lose their entire economy, the annual economy, the GDP of their country. Actually, more than that. So, this is a situation that is unsustainable. It cannot go on any further. And the only people who are to blame for this, if any American is watching this, and if you're a neocon, you know that you should know that the sole responsible person for this is actually you yourself, with all the meddling in the affairs of different countries. You brought this to yourself. And again, we have this fact that United States has benefited greatly from having dollar as the reserve currency of the world. They were able to, print money during the COVID.
Yes.
So many different countries, they were trying to purchase protection gear from another, like masks, ventilators, things like that. And they needed dollars, despite the fact that this currency has nothing behind it, nothing to back it up. The United States had to actually print money in order to help the countries and facilitate trade between them. So it's outrageous, but this is one of the benefits that the United States had received from having its currency as the world reserve currency. The other is the fact that United States military has the budget that is bigger than the next 11 countries combined. How are they doing this? Well, because they have this world reserve currency.
Yes.
And to top it all off, they have the audacity to sanction other countries. So this is something that is almost inevitable. Whether we speak about it or not, whether they're concerned or not, so many different people are annoyed with this, and I don't think that it can be stopped that easily.
Hassan, I will ask you the last question. I was just checking now the news since you mentioned the currency. Russia and other BRICS nations planning new gold-backed currency. As tension with Western economies grows, Russia, along with the other BRICS countries, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa, have made their next move to weaken the dominant status of the US dollar. Last Friday, the Russian embassy in Kenya declared that the BRICS countries are planning to introduce a new trading currency which will be backed by gold. The news was confirmed by Russia Today, the Russian state-controlled TV network. is this the end of the dollar dominance over the global reserve currencies if the BRICS declared or issued its unified currency, which is backed by gold?
Well, I actually have heard about this news right here, right now from you. Because there were rumors and a speculation circulating around the internet, but you now say that Russia has actually confirmed it. So, like, this is my first reaction to this. Please go easy on me.
But theoretically
speaking,
could it end the hegemony of the dollar if there is a currency like this from the BRICS?
It can soften it. I don't think that it can actually be the United States currency would be overthrown by something like this. The problem is that we have this pyramidal scheme when it comes to countries of the world. What do I mean by that? You have two countries like United States and China. They're responsible for a very, very big portion of the world's GDP. 18%, 14%, some number around that. And then you have the five first countries on the list of top 10 biggest economies in the world that are responsible for like 51% of the world's GDP. And, you know, as you can see, there's a trend here. A small amount of countries are responsible for a big portion of the world's trade. So even if the different countries adopt the currency of BRICS, it still means that you know, the countries, the heavyweights, the sort of heavyweight division, if you will, is still going to use dollar as the main currency. So the BRICS bloc would have the quantitative advantage. The dollar bloc would have the qualitative advantage, if you can think of it like that. And so it's very hard, but it allows an alternative. And even right now, I can say that some of the European countries are not really keen on following United States to the pit and abyss that it's directing them towards. But they don't really have an alternative. Maybe they would be able to diversify their economy. Maybe they would be able to, you know, maybe sanction-proof their economy so that they would know it wouldn't be hit by United States. And if that happens, we think that you know, dollar would basically crumble. If that happens, but again, like, we're a very long way from that. But what I will say, this most certainly will enable different countries to have very, very good rates of growth. And that is very important. Now with the Russia and China being on the same side and sort of taking a sort of confrontational stance when it comes to opposing United States economic hegemony, it means that the other countries have like power to grow, and maybe that would enable you know, the countries to actually grow. And when they grow, well, they would have more influence and they would be able to oppose the Western countries better. So I think that we can't talk about the influence that it has over the European countries yet, but it will have substantial influence in the countries in Africa, in Middle East, your country, my country, that are sanctioned. And unfortunately, we can't really trade with anyone. This will ensure that there is a stable way, a very sanction-proof way for the countries to engage with these countries. And by the way, I have to say, there are tremendous opportunities in these countries, these sanctioned countries, for other countries, even the imperialist countries in the West, to benefit from trade with these countries. For example, the biggest lithium depot in the world is actually located in my country, but I mean, we can't use them. It's because of this tyrannical regime, sanctions regime that the Western countries have.
Yeah, imagine that you have
impose.
natural resources that you cannot even dig in or use and benefit from it for the sake of your own people. This is the part that we have to really repeat every time. That is why we need a multipolar world, because the leader of the current unipolar world is choking tens of millions of people by sanctions, by bullying, and forcing them on a certain path. And this is what we are not seeing with other superpowers such as China and Russia. And we have a first-hand experience with them in Syria, in Iran, and in other places. These countries aren't interested in domination; they're interested in business, and they're interested in enriching their own people. And we can do, we can make it a mutual benefit for both sides. And this is, I think, it's a very productive thing for all sides. But till then, 𝐒𝐚𝐧 𝐒𝐚𝐽, it was really a pleasure to speak with you. I learned from you, and I encourage all the followers who are watching this video. Guys, the link of Twitter account of 𝐒𝐚𝐧 is in the description below. Please go and follow him, and also follow his thoughts and insights on different geopolitical issues, especially that he comes from Iran, and also he has a perspective on the Middle East. 𝐒𝐚𝐧, thank you very much.
Pleasure to be on your show. Thank you for inviting me.
And thank you guys for watching and tuning in for this video. I've been your host, 𝐶𝐚𝐽 Almassian of Syriana Analysis. If you're new, please subscribe and share this video with your friends. And if you want to support my independent work like this one, please become a patron, link in the description below, and see you next time.